Recording in progress. So today we are departing the order that we normally do. Today is lesson 5. We are doing environment lighting. Now, a couple things you need to know about lesson 5 or project 5. All right, so project 5 sets up lighting for project 6. Project 6 sets up materials for project 7. So everything you do from this point on is going to be repurposed for later assignments. Project 7 is texturing. All right, now in between 5 and 6 on Sunday, you guys will be doing the animation sequence rendering. That is about an hour-and-a-half video that you watch, and then you're basically going to utilize one of the scenes that you did. Well, one of the scenes, I mean, one of the still lifes that you did, either the rabbit or the actual still life. We have an animated camera, which you will import into your lit project 3 scene. And then you will set it up and render it out using Arnold and Maya, strangely enough, Arnold and Maya to get 70 frames. So one thing to keep in mind. For those of you that, well, let's get a feel for what was the average render time for your still life or rabbit? Your final render. Okay, so 3 minutes. Anybody else? 2? Yeah, 2. It's usually between 2 and 3 if you're not doing anything else on your computer. All right, so the reason that I bring this up and the reason that it's very important is you are now going to render 70 frames out. So if you have 70 frames and it took you 3 minutes a frame, that's going to be 210 minutes. Divide that by 60, that's 3.5 hours. Honestly, give yourself at least 4 hours to render, because there's going to be stuff you might have to stop and start. You know, once you start, Maya has this nasty habit of crashing once in a while. But the good thing is, if you're rendering an animation, you pick up with the last good frame. You don't need to start all over if it crashes in the middle. Does that make sense? All right, so everybody understands on Sunday, you need to do this work on your own, right? I will be on Discord for 4 hours between 10 and 2. If anybody has any really major trouble, you really shouldn't, but I'll be there. I'll answer questions for you. You can also, this is not going to be due until Tuesday. So if worse comes to worse, we can get help on Monday in lab. So all is not lost. Everybody pay attention. Project 4 is your attendance for that day's lecture and lab. Does that make sense? So you need to make sure you turn it in so you can get the attendance credit. That will count for 8 hours. Now, in all honesty, it shouldn't take you more than 6 hours to do the whole assignment. Well, maybe 7, depending on how slow, you take it. But you need to watch the video. After the video, you should be able to, actually, you can use the video as a guide and just kind of start and stop it. Because I go through all the steps for rendering out of Unreal. There's also a document that we have that goes through everything step by step. So just let me kind of show you this, because I really want to make sure that everybody is clear on what we're doing here. So let me go back to project 4. All right, so make sure that you read the instructions here. All right, so you're going to choose one of your Arnold renders, whether you did the rabbit or whether you did the still life. We have an animated camera that in the end should give you this. It's a very simple kind of orbit. Okay, here, this is an orbit, also opposite direction. So whichever scene you lit, this is your scene to use. The animated camera is nothing more than a Maya scene file with just an animated camera. So let's say I demoed the rabbit. So let me go here with the rabbit's instructions. So if you follow these directions step by step, you should be good. I also go over them in lecture. Make sure you follow everything, because if you miss a detail, that could alter your entire render. So I go through the process of explaining how to bring in the camera. I also show it in last month's lecture. I have all the information you need to set it up. Once you bring the camera in, get your render settings going. The big difference between this and all your other assignments is that you will be using Maya's render view to render from, not Arnold's. Everybody hear that? The difference is Maya's render view, you can render a sequence out, but Arnold, you can't, which is ridiculous. Arnold has a batch renderer that is available if you want to buy it. And that's why we're not using Arnold's batch renderer. The version that they give you for a student has watermarks all over it, and it's terrible. Don't do that. Makes sense. So once you're done, you will need Adobe After Effects. Adobe After Effects comes with your Creative Cloud. Now, before you leave lab today, make sure you have After Effects and that it works, so you can get help from Frank or Ari. Because I'd rather have you guys make sure you got everything you need, everything works. You should be good to go. I show you how to bring in your frames, because you're going to have 70 frames. Those frames will be turned into a movie in After Effects. And you will be adding in a watermark just like you do with our standalone Photoshop templates. In fact, After Effects works a little bit like Photoshop. I mean, it's all Adobe. It's got layers. It's got different attributes for the layers, just like Photoshop does. All right, so Unreal. This is a pre-done Unreal project. All right, so those of you that did the rabbit, get your revenge, because it spontaneously combusts. If anybody's interested in visual effects, Ari did that for us. So she's our visual effects guru. In fact, she teaches VFX later on. All right, so this is a pared down Unreal project. You know, Unreal project can be like 9 gig. This is pared down to be about 100 megabytes. I got rid of everything not essential except for the actual parts that you need. In this, your job is to open it up, set the render settings up, set the timeline up. You're going to be using something in Unreal called the sequencer, which you guys probably should be familiar with. You've had animation, right? You guys go over Unreal animation yet? Yeah, a little bit. So you know the sequencer is where all the animation happens. It's like Maya's timeline a little. So it's done for you. You just need to set up the number of frames, which is starts at 0, ends at 70. And then you're going to be using the movie queue, which is sort of like Maya's render settings and then batch rendering. This honestly should take you no more than an hour to do. Rendering 70 frames in Unreal takes about 20 seconds. However, setting it up takes longer. Just make sure you're detail oriented and you get all the steps. All right, does that make sense? I'll go over this again, sort of at the end. I'll make sure Frank and Ari go over it also with you guys. But one thing you want to do is make sure that you have all your stuff working. And all your stuff means Maya's good, and you've also got After Effects. Questions? So this will take the place of either having a Zoom session or coming in on Sunday. All right, if you think of any questions, you can always email me or message me in FSO. All right, so project 5, which is what we're working on today, lesson 5 is going to be due Sunday. So everything gets really tight. So today's assignment will be due Sunday. Sunday's assignment will be due Tuesday. Monday's assignment will be due on, I believe it is Thursday, because that's going to be the start of materials. And in materials, we always have 2 days of lecture and 2 days of lab to go over all of it. All right, makes sense. Questions? Everybody good? Okay, thank you. All right, so we have an interior scene for you. We have a day version and we have a night version you're going to be doing. We also have an exterior. You got a day version and or a night version. Now, the idea with this is whichever daytime environment you go with, interior or exterior, you must do the opposite environment, opposite time of day for your other scene. I'll say that again. So, day scene, you pick one, interior or exterior, your choice. Whichever one you do there, you must do the opposite time of day, opposite environment for the night one. So say you do the interior day, you got to do the exterior night. You do the exterior day, you got to do the interior night. Make sense? Now, you'll also be doing 2 renders instead of just 1. We've got a long shot, which is just kind of an establishing shot, and we've got a close-up area. Once you light, what you will do is light for the long shot, meaning the whole environment. If that matches the reference, the close-up will match the reference also. It's not like you got to do different lighting. It would be as though we were actually in an environment. Take a picture of this whole room, but yet I focus in on one of the desks. That's really all we're doing. And all the light that's already in here would be used to illuminate that desk or your desk or whatever we had set up as a subject. We have 2 separate downloads for you. They are 2 separate Maya project folders because they will use different resources. Today, we're going to be working with what are called dome lights, where we can put a high dynamic range image in it. High dynamic range images have enough information, so we can use them for lighting and for color information in our scene. Would act just like a real environment does, looking through the window or having light in the window, or if you go outside. We are also going to be working with what are called portal lights. Portal lights take a dome light, focus the energy in an interior through the openings, like well, not walls, but through windows, through doors, anything that had an opening that allows light from the outside to come in to an environment inside. It's a lot more efficient than just utilizing a bare dome light, because the dome light is calculated in 360 degrees. When you go to render, it takes longer to calculate. Whereas if you have portal lights in an interior environment, you're only calculating a few, in theory, a few rectangles. All they do is funnel or channel that dome light through them. They're basically slaves to the dome light. They have no controls of their own. And mesh lights. Mesh lights allow us to take a piece of geometry, say a light bulb and a lamp, select it, we can make it a mesh light, which turns it from being a light reflecting surface to a light emitting surface. Now, the interesting thing about Arnold is that that light emitting surface still has its connections. So you take a light bulb, and initially in your scene, you select everything and you assign an AI standard surface to it, right? Everything's meant to be reflective. You take that light bulb, you make it a mesh light, it becomes emissive, but if you decide you no longer want that to be a mesh light, you can actually delete the light that's parented to it, and it resumes its old function. Sounds a little confusing, but I'll show you what happens. All right, so today, lesson 5, environment lighting. Sunday will be the animation sequence rendering. And then on Monday, we're going to start materials. Materials are a 2-day assignment. So you get a little bit of a breather, but don't get into a false sense of, oh, I got plenty of time, because there's going to be a lot of work to do. You do have a lot more creative freedom than you do with some of the other assignments. And we'll get to that on Monday. Don't want to go too far. And then next Friday, we're going to start Project 7, which is our last assignment. That's broken up into 4 parts. All right, so Discord office hours next week will be Tuesdays and Thursdays. I will have special Discord hours this Sunday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. for Project 4. Questions? Everybody okay? All right. So interior lighting is what we're going to start with. What the camera sees, how we interpret what is called camera exposure. We talked about exposure and lights, but now we're going to be kind of looking at what a camera actually does with information that it gets and how we define that in CG. Exterior lighting, time of day, shadow length. Today also marks a departure from us just adding color into the color attribute of the light. We are going to be using what is called color temperature. Color temperature works the way real world light works and is measured in photography, in any situation in the real world. Go out, buy a light bulb. Take a look at the box. It'll show you how bright it is. You know, you go and you buy, well, I want a 100-watt light bulb equivalent in LED, and it'll tell you, oh, okay, well, it's about 1100 lumens. That's how bright it is, but it'll also go, oh, it's 3800K. That 3800K is the color temperature of the light. White light or average sunlight is usually around 6500K. We'll get into a little bit of that too, but There is a color temperature chart that Jeremy Byrne has in his digital lighting and rendering book, which you will utilize as reference. In fact, the link for it is right here. And go online. Now, I tried to get the links as close as I could to where they were. Safari Books Online is not really good at being able to bookmark a specific location, but here's the color table you want to utilize. Dome lights, portal lights, mesh lights, went over a little bit of that. Daylight versus night light or nighttime lighting. Linearized colors, just make sure color management is turned on, which it should be in your scenes by default. All right, so I know a lot of information, just trying to set it all up so we can hit those points as we go through. All right, so the first thing, let's take a look at what interior light exposure looks like and how we utilize it. All right, so I have two images here, two locations that I took pictures of. One on the left, this one was done with basically a digital single lens reflex, which is just kind of a semi-professional camera. It's just a step above point and shoot. I can adjust the camera exposure, the color balance of the camera, the shutter speed, the aperture opening, a whole bunch of other things. In this instance, I had everything on manual, including manual focus. On the right, phone camera. Fully automatic, couldn't be lazier, but I get the same results. So my goal in the images on the left was to record what my eye saw as I looked outside the window. Now, when I looked outside the window, this is how bright I saw that environment. So I took a picture, fiddled around with the exposure on the camera until I got what I saw. But in getting the windows to look natural, what happens to the rest of the environment? Yeah, this all gets darker. This looks like it's totally underexposed, meaning there's not enough light in there. So then, once I was happy with that, then I took a picture of what my eye saw standing inside the room as far as how bright it looked. And I didn't care what it looked like outside the window. So now this looks natural. This is overexposed. Now, our eyes can adjust instantaneously between levels of light, like not really huge levels of light, but subtle differences. So when we look outside the window, we can see it looks pretty natural. Look inside the room in like a split second, everything looks natural. But a camera can't do that. A camera, you have to adjust for what you want it to see. Does that make sense? So on the right side, sitting in Denny's, just pick my phone up, took a picture of the inside environment. So inside here looks pretty natural. Outside, can't see the sky. Overexposed. All right, stuck the phone in the window, let it adjust itself before I took a picture and took another picture. So outside looks natural. You can see it's the same environment. Here's the same vehicle. And here is the same tree. Got a van back here. So same image, but allowing the camera to adjust itself so outside look natural, the inside is way underexposed. In fact, a whole lot more than it is over in the other environment. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because the reference images that you find on the internet for environments are usually set up so the inside, if it's an interior shot, they usually set up so the inside looks good. They don't care what the outside looks like. The window is usually overexposed. So if I go over here, let's go. And if you search images on Google or whatever search engine, always try to find images that are large in size. All right, so take a look at almost any of these images and you'll see the inside's nice and bright. The outside is almost blown out. Now, every once in a while, you may get a photographer that does a little light box or Photoshop light essentials, goes in and uses a high dynamic range image. They set their camera on what's called RAW. They take all the information in, and they can basically keep the light levels the same for different parts of the environment. Now, that is a truly stylized looking image. It's not one that looks completely natural to us. But every once in a while, you may find something like that. Real estate is one of the big places they use it. They'll come in and take pictures, and they will come in and turn all the lights on, take pictures, they'll open the blinds, the windows, they'll turn every light on, they will take a high dynamic range image and tweak it so that everything looks nice and bright and even. In addition to also using a small lens, like a wide angle, to make everything look really big. Questions? Does that make sense? Comments, discussion? All right, so interior light is a result of several different things. So in this environment that we have here, this is a typical image off the internet. So this room I happen to pick because it's one of those nice big open space environments where there's lots of windows, so lots of light coming in. Now, what would you say is the main source of light in the real world in this image? What's our main source of light during the day? Sun, yeah. Inside, it's probably going to be the sun unless, you're in a classroom like this where the window's covered and you got to turn lights on. But if you're home, you usually throw your blinds or shades open, let light in. Natural light, as an artist, natural light is the bomb to work with. That's really the light you want because it shows all spectrums. So, sunlight coming in. Now, what we see here, a lot of light coming in, we can see it. Sunlight directly hit walls, and you can see it hit the door right over here. So we got a nice big bright spot here, got a nice big bright spot there. Got some direct light up here, up here. Now, anything else going on as far as light goes? Bounce lights? Please define. No, go ahead. There's no wrong answers. We'll help you out. I will say, yeah, bounce light. Well, yep, but even before it gets into the room. So remember when we talked about lighting for the first time on, what was it? Monday. Talked about lighting, right? Sunlight comes through our atmosphere. Does all that direct sunlight reach Earth? No. It goes through, it's got different layers of atmosphere, different particles, moisture, pollutants, pollen, whatever it happens to be. Some of that gets trapped or dispersed, especially if sunlight passes through clouds. Remember, clouds are nothing more than moisture, water vapor. So as it comes in, it gets diffused, comes in, and it really acts like a big giant blanket of light or big giant fill light. Now, that is the case here, plus once that blanket of light and direct light reach Earth, what happens? So, yeah, when it gets through the clouds and it makes its way finally to us. Even spread of light. What's it going to do though? Is it, so for example, we look through the window here. What are we seeing mostly when we look through the window? Like you may get a little bit of sunlight, but what happens if the sun is not directly coming in through the window? What else do we get? Lukey said it earlier. Bounce light. Remember, it's going to hit the ground, trees, walls, buildings, people, bounce all around. That's why a lot of times when you open your window, you will get maybe some golden light, maybe a little bit of green mixed if you got a lot of trees. Depending on what's around you, you're going to get a lot of that bounced light coming in through your window. So not only are you having direct sunlight come in through the window, but you've got this other ambient light, if you will, pouring in through those openings. So remember, Rembrandt liked to stick his patrons in front of a window. Why? Because it's a big, broad area of light, not just for direct sunlight, but that's where you're going to get a lot of the light coming in that's indirect also. And that's why we have these soft boxes that act like big areas of light, like a window. So we've got direct sunlight pouring in, and we've got all this other light kind of just pouring in through the window in all different directions. Remember sunlight? What kind of light rays does the sun have? Directional or they are parallel. Remember, parallel light rays give you what? Light is always 180 degrees from the light source. Shadows. Go outside, take a look at the trees, fence posts, lamp posts. They are all, their shadows point in exactly the same direction. They are all parallel to each other. They don't fan out. They are more or less perfectly parallel. So we get sunlight coming in. We have all this other light streaming in. bouncing around. Now, when that light gets in, whether it's direct light or indirect light pouring in through the window, it is bouncing around all over the place. So in CG, we got sunlight. Our replacement for sun is going to be the directional light, right? Parallel light rays, parallel shadows. All that ambient light streaming in through the windows, that bounce light, the sky, that is going to be our dome light. We're going to put an image in there, and that's going to act just like our environment outside. That's going to be bringing light in all different directions, really diffused with color. Now, if you're outside, you only need a dome light. If you're inside, well, we use portal lights to kind of funnel that dome light and make it more efficient. So we would put a portal outside each one of these window openings. And that would allow our dome to be a little more efficient. Now, in CG, do we get an entire one-to-one transfer of energy like we do more or less in the real world? We don't get 100% in the real world, but we get a lot better. So the answer is no. We have a lot less efficiency in CG than we do in the real world, which means we can't always guarantee that our light is going to hit a surface, bounce off it, and continue to bounce as much as it does in the real world. So a lot of times we have to add some additional lights. Area lights make really good companions to adding bounce light in. So for example, take a look at the light coming in, hitting the door here. It's got so much energy, it bleaches out that color in the door, bounces off that door. Where does it go? Goes back to the wall. And then from the wall, it's going to go pretty much wherever it can, everywhere. Now, it's still hitting that wall with a lot of energy. It's bleached the wall out. It's going to hit the floor. It's going to hit other parts. You can see how bright it is even in the corners here where the door is. You know, same thing. You're going to get a lot of light coming in through these upper windows. You know, it's going to hit something directly and it's going to bounce all around. Now, in CG, we may get this really nice bright light coming off of the door, and it may hit the wall with decent amount of energy, but from there, we may not get the same level of energy bouncing around everywhere else. So add a few area lights to compensate for it. Does that make sense? Questions? Now, how many do you need? It depends on your reference. Maybe one gives you the look that you need. Maybe it's two. Now, just because we're using these replacements in CG for real world lights doesn't mean that they always give us the results. Just like the portrait. Had to add a few fill lights underneath the chin. A couple other places possibly. All right. Questions, comments, discussion? All right, so let's head over to night. What's driving most of our light at night? Interior light? Yes, interior lights. Interior scene, interior lights, yes. Now, here we had a lot of energy from the environment outside, bringing a lot of light in. Even on an overcast day, you open your windows, you got a lot of light coming in. Here, our windows provide virtually no light. I mean, they do, but it's only like a good 5 feet from the window. And then you still step on a Lego or your dog or cat's tail or stub your toe somewhere. Because honestly, it's too dark. So we still have a dome light to get that environment outside, but that dome light doesn't really play a big part in providing interior nighttime illumination. Most of our illumination is going to come from artificial sources. Lights. Bare light bulbs, lamps, perfect uses for mesh lights. All right, so where is the main light source in this scene? Yep, I would say so, because if you take a look, that's pretty much where that pattern of light's coming from. Now, this is one of those lampshades where it lets light down, and it also allows some light to come out through the top. So it's opened on both ends. A little bit more light comes down, then goes up. So that's going to provide our light. Is that the only light source in the scene? What else? Yep, like right about here. Chances are that's probably a lamp or something. Somebody took a lampshade off of, stuck it on the ground. And here, what's it being used for? Yep, exactly. Separate subject from background, pretty much. Almost the same kind of thing we used with that back candle light in the still life. Just a little bit of light just to separate it, to give it a sense of depth. Now, in CG, yep, we're going to use mesh light. So technically and theoretically, your scene should be modeled like it exists. So the modeler hopefully made light bulbs in that lamp. So you can select that light bulb, make a mesh light, make it bright enough, and then since we can't see the geometry here, you can use whatever makes sense to get that look. So what could you try here? Could do a spotlight. Looks like it's kind of going, got some light here in the corner too. Think, what's that? Yeah, think bare light bulb. Point light would be a good replacement for a bare light bulb. Why? Omnidirectional, shines in all directions. We would still use a dome light, but that dome light's not going to contribute a whole lot of light or energy into the environment. It's there mostly for eye candy. You can see, oh, I got an environment outside. I have lights. I'll have a little bit of light coming in, but it's nothing that you could really use to illuminate the entire scene. Now, if you're doing a film noir shoot, that would be a whole different animal. All right, does that make sense? Questions? No questions are crazy or silly. All right, so exterior, outdoors, you really honestly have it a lot easier than you do in an interior. For the most part, If you walk outside and it's daytime, you've got sun and you've also got sky. Right? You don't have to worry about, oh, I'm an enclosed in environment, so I need portals or I need mesh lights. If it's a bright sunny day, you generally don't have to worry about that. So a lot of times, a daytime exterior scene is a little easier to set up in light, or I should say a little quicker. Now, if you take a look at the shadows here, I took some pictures, different times of the day. The one on the left is the Zen garden, which if anybody's familiar with it, or maybe not, it is behind building 4D. You guys know where the 3D Arts building is, right? 4B. If you go out the back of the 3D Arts, make a right, go around the corner, there's a patio there. It's designed for everybody, staff, students. They call it the Zen garden because it's a really nice kind of place to be. It's very tranquil. It's got a couple of trellises, it's got chairs, it's got some tables. It's got some outdoor sofas there, a lot of greenery. Now, outside the Zen garden, this was 10:30 in the morning. Average 10:30 in the morning, shadow from the sun. Most people think that when the sun has long shadows, they get super soft. They don't. That's not a really super soft shadow. And then behind building 4B, there's that little brick patio that they have, the white block patio behind 4B. They have tables. Took another shot, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, roughly the same length of shadow, roughly the same shadow quality. It's not razor sharp, but it's not super soft either. Does that make sense? Now, compare that with sun in the summer about 6:30 in the evening. Sun is still up because we're still on daylight savings time. And you can see the shadows are pretty long, but they're not really super soft either. It's not until you get to that point where it's dusk, where the sun is almost being hidden by the horizon, that the shadows are really long and they tend to get much softer. So the one thing to keep in mind, if you're trying to make a believable environment, it goes for Unreal, it goes for Maya, it goes for any piece of software, even artistically, keep your shadows, no matter how long they are, fairly hard. They're not going to be as soft as you think. Having said that, if you're working on a stylized environment, alien world, you've got art direction for different shadows, that's fine. As long as it fits in that whole environment that you're working on, whatever the mandate is for that. Questions? Comments? Okay. So exterior light, pay attention to the shadows. So for example, this is our Zen garden environment. That's our exterior environment. You can usually get a good idea of where the shadows are. All right, so here's an example of dusk. So the sun is super low. Now the sun is so low that you're not going to get a lot of bounce light going on. That light is low in the sky. It doesn't have a lot. There's not much light in the sky or much light directly from the sky, from the sun, because it's so close to the horizon. So we wind up with a lot of backlight. Whereas the sky will be a lot brighter than the environment itself. You'll see a lot of silhouette. Think project 2, where we had the point light backlight exercise, right? Light behind the subject, you're going to see silhouette. So you're going to get very little direct or indirect light. You're going to get a lot of silhouette. As the light levels fall down, you're also going to see less saturation in color in your environment as well. Can barely make out colors here. Go outside at night, right? Virtually no sun, but the sky is always going to be brighter than the environment. Take a look up. If you're not in an area where there's too much light pollution, you're going to see silhouettes of trees, of buildings, against a much lighter looking sky. All right, so exterior lighting, when you've got something that's intimate, kind of like a close-up still life, you're going to be using a lot of little lights to illuminate it. There are times, you may have one big giant overhead light, but generally outside at night, you're going to have more smaller lights creating a lot more light than one big giant one. Unless you're in a, sports stadium. And then the whole idea is to get it to look as bright as the sun. So they have all these giant, super bright spotlights, basically, all around it. Now, a lot of these lights are going to be kind of low energy. Remember, lighting is additive, color and intensity. So all these little lights are going to add up a lot. So they're going to be a lot of artificial lights. In this case, some tea candles, some LED lights on the table, all providing additional illumination. Now you can see we've got a lot of blue that could be coming from the sky above, could also be coming from, like a overhang tarp, to kind of keep out, I don't know, maybe it tends to rain. Talking about down here? It does, yeah. So it could be a myriad of things. It could be, maybe it's a bug zapper all the way over there near the corner. Or it could be a, photographer going, hey, I want a little cool light over here, just to kind of add a little sense of warm versus cool to kind of get that forward receding look in the environment. Yeah, that's kind of why I chose this image, because it really has a nice contrast like that. So that's good, because if you see that, your mind should go, okay, where's it coming from, and how can I recreate that? So if you think overhead light and try it, you're going to quickly find it's going to blanket the entire thing. And that's not really what you want. You want to kind of have it more localized on one side than the other. Because honestly, if there were blue light above, we'd be able to see it in the flowers. All right. Color temperature, I showed you guys where it is inside Jeremy Burns' book. Now, does anybody know why in color temperature we use K or Kelvin? Anybody? Well, Kelvin was an 18th century physicist. He found that if he took a block of carbon and heated it, it glowed different colors at different temperatures. And it was one of the few substances that was consistent. He got the same results every time he did it. So what they wound up doing was using that as a uniform scale for consistency in color versus heat. Color, intensity, heat. Now, for him, since he was heating that carbon, it was all about temperature. it's become a standard for photography, pretty much any aspect of photography, even when you guys buy light bulbs. Like I said, you go buy a light bulb, look on the side of the box. It'll go, oh, it's warm white. It'll be like, oh, it'll be like 3,800K or 4,000K. What's that? Yes. Yep. Almost, yeah. That's exactly right. What happens is he found that it started to glow around the red range when he heated it. And as he increased the heat, it went from red to orange to yellow. When you got around 5,000, 5,500, 6,000, 6,500, it was close to white. And as it got hotter and hotter, it went pure white, and then it started to get cool. So Jeremy Byrne did a pretty good job of kind of taking some real world objects that we use all the time, like a match flame, a candle flame, tungsten light bulbs, household tungsten light. Honestly, nobody uses incandescent bulbs anymore. Hardly anybody uses fluorescent lights. Fluorescent lights used to give out that greenish color, and that's the color the gas would, mercury vapor would kind of glow at that temperature. But, so this part right here, this is fairly neutral, meaning for us, whitish light. And as it goes down, it gets warmer. As it goes up, it gets cooler. Does that make sense? Now, the reason that's important is because in order to accurately recreate something, you need to kind of understand, all right, I'm looking at a photo. What kind of lights am I looking at? Okay, I got some lights in the ceiling here. What color would you say they are? Let's use the projector as kind of a standard. That whitish background on my slide, that'd be roughly 6,500, 7,000, somewhere around there. But take a look at the lights in the ceiling. Do they look to be the same? So how would you classify them? Warmer, yeah. So that means the color temperature would be lower on them. Now, a lot of times, if you're working with, say, an environment and you got a lamp, for example, we have an interior environment that has an arm lamp on it, and that arm, has 4 different arms, 4 different light bulbs inside of it. All right, you have to think, well, what kind of light would I use in there? Well, I'd probably go to the store, buy a box of them, get 4 light bulbs, put it in. Chances are they're probably not going to be very cool. They're going to be on the warm side. Most of our interior lighting, especially normal home illumination, tends to be a little bit on the warmer side than cooler. Now, having said that, LEDs have really changed the game, because a lot of LED light bulbs, you can actually change the color temperature on. I replaced the light in my bathroom with an LED fixture, and I got a slider on there. I can change the color temperature and the intensity of that light. So that's kind of a game changer, though. Pretty soon the days of buying a light bulb and throwing it in and being stuck with it are going to be done. It's so much easier when you can adjust the temperature you want, the intensity that you want. Questions? Comments? All right, so let me fire up I'm just going to kind of give you a really super quick idea of how color temperature works. So got to wait for Maya to start up. And feel free to follow along if you want to. All I'm going to do is bring up a blank Maya scene, and we're going to create what's called a dome light and just render it and play with it. I don't even need anything in the environment, although you could add a plane, you could add a sphere. All right, so a couple things about the Arnold shelf for today. So you know that this little icon right here is the Arnold area light. The icon next to it is a mesh light. This icon is photometric light. We're not going to use that. This icon, it looks like a big giant wireframe. This is a dome light. And these are portals that get associated with dome lights when you have an interior scene. All right, so we know this is an area light. This is a mesh light. That's a dome light. And that one is a portal. All right, so if you click the dome light icon, it will basically make a giant sphere that will envelop your entire scene. And the whole idea of that dome light is so that it looks like it's infinitely far away pretty much all the time. So if I zoom out, it's going to take quite a bit of zooming. There you go. You can see that it's a gigantic sphere. All right. I lied. Just to make it interesting, I'm just going to create a polyplane and a sphere. I like to translate that sphere up a unit so it sits on top of the surface. And what the heck? We'll duplicate the sphere a couple times. They're free. All right, so this functions properly, I'm going to select my geometry and assign what? AI standard surface. How do you do that? Shift T, very good. So assign new material, Arnold, shader, AI standard surface. Attributes. First thing we want to do is what? Specular weight off. Next, our base color, 0.5. Now, for today, that will change, but for now, that's fine. Oh, it's contagious. No. Now, I have a default dome light in there, has an intensity of 1. If I render this out, you can see that it provides quite a bit of light all around. It's completely surrounding my objects. It's very soft light, just like an overcast day, only probably a lot brighter than an overcast day. Now, didn't do anything other than create it, make sure my geometry was inside, render it. Now, until today, we've been playing around with putting color in the color attribute. In a dome light, this is where you plug your images in. So we're not going to use that for color. We're going to enable color temperature here. Now, before I do that, Let me save a snapshot of this render. Because as soon as I turn on color temperature, watch what's going to happen. Slightly warmer. Can you guys see that? Just ever so slightly. And that is the default. Now, most software packages, including Unreal, start off with 6,500 degrees as a base standard. Some may go a little higher, some may go a little lower, but it's usually around 6,500. RenderMan did it, V-Ray did it, Arnold does it, Unreal does it. Now, if I want to make it warmer, I'm going to lower the color temperature. So you can see as I start to lower it, it's going yellowish and orangish, really orange. Now we're going to get into the reds. You can also think of it like a match flame or a candle flame, an actual candle flame. Because, you know, the candle flame, the very center of that candle is going to be blue. Then it's going to be white. And then it's going to be, you know, as it gets outside of the center of the flame, it's going to be cooler. And the color changes. All right. So we go back to 6,500. As we increase it, what's going to happen to it? It's going to get cooler. Yeah. Now, for color temperature, honestly, the slider is garbage. Like, nobody measures color temperature at, like, you know, a unit or 10 units. It's usually like 500 unit block or maybe 100 units. Very rare you'll get a light bulb that's 3585 for color temperature. It's usually going to be 3500, 3700, 3800, something like that. So honestly, just plug in numbers. Don't rely on the slider. Now, as soon as I turn that off, it's going to go back to my happy white light. Does that make sense? Questions? So very simple usage. Like I said, that chart that Jeremy Byrne has is great. Really works good. All right, so dome light, found out how to make it. It's that icon right there. Very simple to use. Scaling the dome light itself or translating it really doesn't have much effect at all. It's designed to look infinitely far away to the camera all the time until you actually pass through it. It's one of those deals where it looks the same, looks the same, looks the same. Whoa, I'm outside of it. Now, the one thing that you can do with the dome light when you have an image in it is rotate it so that you can get the exact location of your image visible to the camera. Really important if you've got an open window and you want to have a tree or you want to have a bush or you want to have a car or a building visible in a specific location. So rotation is really the only thing that matters, as is intensity. Here's the thing about the dome light. You cannot have an image and use color temperature at the same time. The color, if you use an image, the color for that dome light is going to come through the image. If you have color temperature on, it's either going to negate the image that you've got plugged in, or It's just going to ignore it and not function at all. I've had to do both for students in the past. So color temperature is really good for a dome light if you have no image in it. When you put an image in, it's going to basically negate it. Now, when we start using environments, interior enclosed environments, if it's modeled correctly, it's going to be like a house. You're going to have windows in that house. Those windows are going to allow light to come in. This is where we use portal lights to confine the illumination of that dome light from 360 degrees, which is basically what this is, now, when you use portal lights, you still have a dome light, but the dome light feeds the portal light the information. The portal will display the dome, but the dome light turns itself off. That's so you're just calculating this much area rather than 360 degrees. Well, the dome light is the parent of the portals. So what happens is they kind of act like the slave for the portal. The portal acts like a slave for the dome light, where it takes all that information and funnels it into a small area. It's just designed to be efficient for environments that have window openings. Because honestly, we can't even see the sun other than these 3 little windows on the back wall outside. We don't care. We don't get any effect from all the other sunlight, all the other light outside around us. We're only concerned with the light that we can see coming in. When you're rendering, that's how you want to calculate your light. You don't want to go, okay, I got a 360-degree dome light. I got to calculate 360 degrees because I got openings in the window. No, it makes more sense to create little slaves basically to funnel all that dome light energy in through. Does that make sense? Right, so mesh lights are actually fairly simple. So let's go back to my Maya scene here. What I'm going to do is turn down my dome light really far. So it's basically not quite as bright. Well, let's go even lower. There we go. So really, really dark dome light. What I want to do is I'm going to take one of these spheres and make it a mesh light. Somebody pick one. Doesn't matter to me. Which one should we make into a mesh? All right, let's do the middle one. Now, all you have to do is select your geometry, go up to the mesh light icon, and click on it. Now, let me Z back. So there is my sphere. That's sphere 1. That's going to be my mesh light. Now, watch what happens to sphere 1 when I click on the mesh button. Notice all of a sudden there's something parented underneath of it. It now has what's called it's letting you know that piece of geometry is now a mesh light. This little icon that's parented to the sphere allows you to have light controls. So if I click on the sphere itself, notice it just shows AI standard surface. But this light is telling the renderer this surface is not active. It's not going to reflect light. We're going to emit light. And it's going to follow most of the typical Arnold attributes. So now if I render this, you can see it's got a little bit of light there. So let's crank it up. Let's do like typical Arnold. Let's crank it up a lot. Now you'll notice, I bring it up. It's sort of acting like a big giant sphere. So the first question people have is, wait, you made that a mesh light. Why can't I see it? Because Arnold's messing with your head. It is the only piece of software I know that has a light that you made an object into a light and you want it to be visible where it's not visible. So in the attributes for the mesh light, you must turn on light visible. That little switch right there will make it now visible. Everybody forgets this. Honestly, this will happen to at least one or two of you. You'll create it and go, oh, what's wrong with it? And delete it and create it again. And it still does the same thing. Don't forget, it's Arnold and Maya trying to drive you crazy. So just go down under, it's like one little section down. It's right underneath color temperature. Turn on light visible. Now, this light is subject to all the other attributes of an Arnold light, meaning, guess what? I can scale it. To make it really big, look what it does to my shadows. Make it really small, look what it does to my shadows. So if you've got a bunch of tiny little modeled, lights all around your environment and you make them all mesh lights, they're probably going to give out a hard shadow like they would in the real world. Does that make sense so far? Now, what happens if you go, oh crap, I didn't want to make that a mesh light, I made a mistake? Well, if you go into your outliner, expand that little group and click on the light itself and hit delete, now it's back to where it was. Notice that whatever scale, whatever translation you did to that light before you deleted that light, it resets the geometry back to its base. So let me Z back if I can. So again, you want to make it a mesh light. Mesh, there it is. It's going to start off at its bare bones again, being too dark, not being visible. You're going to have to translate it. You're going to have to increase the intensity. And you can scale it. You can move it around. And again, if you delete that light, it's going to return the geometry back to its original position. So if you accidentally make the wrong object a mesh, you can always get out of it. Question? All right, now One other thing you need to know about the mesh light is it's devious, and it's Arnold, and it's Maya. So just like having the light not be visible by default is designed to drive you crazy, if you want to have multiple objects be driven by the same mesh light. So for example, our ceiling. If we had this modeled in CG, we'd have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we'd roughly have 7 different lights in the ceiling. There's no reason we turn all those lights on with one switch, right? In the room. I also have a slider. I can adjust the intensity of it. If you've got, say, for example, in our interior, we've got 17 recessed ceiling lights. You want all 17 of them to be driven by the same mesh light control. There's no reason to have to adjust 17 different little lights. They are all going to act like a unit. Same thing with a lamp. You got a lamp with 3 or 4 bulbs. You turn it on, all the lights go on. You don't go turn one light on at a time unless you like that kind of thing. So the idea is most of the time when you're dealing with interior lighting, you may have similar lights. You may have ceiling lights. You may have groups of lights in a chandelier, for example. You may have lights in an arm lamp. You want them all those lights in that fixture to be the same, to have the same intensity, the same color, be controlled by one switch. In Arnold, the only way to assign an Arnold mesh to more than one object is to combine the object first, combine the mesh. So here's what happens. Say, for example, I want to do the outer 2 spheres. I want them to be mesh lights. So in most ordinary, common, like logical pieces of software, you would select them both, and I would click create mesh, and it would make a mesh out of both of those, give me one light control. But look, it takes the very last light you selected in your string. You know how you can shift select or control select, or in the Mac command select. This is the only one that's actually got a mesh. So what I have to do is, if I want to create this light and both have them be a mesh with the same light, I have to go up. And right now I'm in the modeling tool set, go to mesh and combine. You don't have to do anything fancy. There really aren't any settings. In fact, you could probably go up and just reset the settings and just apply and close. So what it does, it takes those 2, combines them into one. Now I can take that new combined mesh and make it a mesh light. So now it's visible. Made it visible. Now I can control them all the same. Want to use color temperature? There we go. So single object, easy to make a mesh from. If you have multiple objects you want to be driven by the same mesh, you got to first combine them and then select the new combined mesh and assign that as a mesh light. The reason I mention this is because you will need it for whatever nighttime scene you do. All right, got a couple more things we'll go over and we'll take a break. HDR images. So HDR stands for high dynamic range image. Originally developed mid-1980s for laboratory research, university research, developed for images taken from satellite so that we could have as much detail and as much resolution, as much original information as possible, and be able to process it after. Now, the whole idea with a high dynamic range image is that it can handle a whole lot more information than a typical RGB 24-bit image off the internet. All right, so on the first day, we talked about 24-bit RGB images, right? 24 bits. Each channel, R, G, and B, has 8 bits of information. Eight bits of information is roughly equal to 256 steps between absolute black and absolute white. 256 steps gives you almost a continuous gradient between white and black. Almost. Now, when you have 8 bits of information per channel, you add up those channels and you have 24 bits. 8 times 3 is 24. Believe it or not, 256 steps or values in each channel, when combined together, can give you 16.5 million colors. That's why typical RGB 24-bit images off the internet look like continuous tone photos. Does that make sense? Now, contrast that to a high dynamic range image. A high dynamic range image is what we call 32 bits. And you would say, well, isn't that just adding another 8 bits of information to another channel? Not really. 32 bits simply means that each channel, and you can have almost an unlimited number of channels in this image format. Each channel has 32 bits of information between absolute black and absolute white. I would say you don't have unlimited number of channels, but you can certainly have a lot more than 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. All right, so how big can that be? Let's go down and let's pick on our calculator. So let's go scientific here. So we have 8 bits of information. 8 bits roughly gives us 256 levels of gray. So if we have 256 and we basically qubit. So 256 times 256 times 256 times 256. Theoretically, you can have over 4 billion levels of information inside an HDR image. That comes at a cost. That cost is file size, is pretty big. Now, the reason we need all this information is because this contains enough information to actually use for lighting purposes. Now, the whole idea with creating an HDR image started out by just taking a typical 24-bit image, taking one picture, setting the exposure normally, take another picture of the same environment, underexpose it, meaning make it darker, taking a third picture, overexposing it, making it really bright, taking all those three images together and putting them together so that you now have a dynamic range that has a lot more information in it. Most of your cell phones have the ability to make HDR images. Anybody ever make one in your cell phone? If you do, you know they come out as JPEGs, right? So JPEGs, not the greatest format to make them, but if you take, usually your phone will do at least 3, maybe 4 images. It'll make them into a file, and then you can take that into Photoshop and put them into layers. Photoshop as a tool to make HDR images. Ideally, you'd want to have a camera that's designed to do this because you'll get the best information out of that camera. Now, the stuff you get off the internet, it could be done any number of ways, as long as it looks good. Now, as I mentioned, this was developed 1980s, really did not become accessible to us, the consumer, people now with cell phones, until we broke the 1 megapixel barrier. That was mid-1990s, well, early 1990s. I was working at a newspaper in the magazine section in early 1990, and we got our first digital camera that was a 10 megapixel. It was $25,000 at the time. Yeah. Now, 10 megapixel is laughable. That's pretty much, if you've got a FaceTime camera, that's pretty much what your crappy FaceTime camera resolution is. And your other one is probably 24 or 32, megapixels, 64. They're ridiculous now. All right, so this format was originally written in the C programming language. C is kind of the mother of all modern programming languages. C++, C#, Mel, Python, Perl, you name any, except Java. You name pretty much any big programming language, and it's based off of C in some way. Now, originally came in the HDR format, high dynamic range format. The thing about that high dynamic range, while it does allow a lot of information in it, it does not necessarily allow for editability. So in comes another company who has a need for editability inside a high dynamic range image. That company is Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, right around 2000. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with who ILM is or what they do, they were the visual effects arm of George Lucas. Probably one of two of the biggest visual effects companies on the planet. The other one's Weta. So ILM, they had just procured Sony's brand new HD digital camera. George Lucas decided in 2000 he was going to reboot Star Wars. And they decided we want to use that camera. But the thing is, if we use that HDR format, we really can't edit all that information and reorganize it the way we want. Because they were worried about, they wanted to compartmentalize things like lighting, color balance, and have different layers for different parts of a shot. And they could do all of that in HDR, but the original format wasn't that friendly to write that in or to get it out. So they wrote a high dynamic range image format called EXR. You know it better as OpenEXR because it is open source. Open source meaning it's free to use for anybody. You can alter the code, you can redistribute it, but you must contribute back to the collective. So it became an image standard. Now, before HDR, there were a lot of different image formats that were standard in cinema. Targa was one of them. That was True Vision's version of a high dynamic, not a high dynamic range, but a really nice image format that was low compression ratio to quality. So EXR became the standard. Pretty much everybody uses it. There are a bunch of other formats too, but they're all high dynamic range. The idea is get as much information as you can, and then you can adjust it later in post. I know that comes to be a cliche, you will fix it in post, but that's why you can fix it in post now, because you got all this information. And honestly, high dynamic range images contain enough information where if the director looks at the daily footage and goes, I don't like that lighting, take it into a compositing program, and a good compositor can almost relight the entire scene because all that original light information is there. Now, yeah. Well, I just like to give you a little context into why we're using this and where it came from. Will you ever need to know that? I don't know, maybe not, but I always geek out and find it interesting. So
what cases would you need to use HDR?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. Here we go. You will find that is the most prevalent free format on the internet. In fact, most images that you use in dome lights are going to be HDR. EXRs are usually what we write out for the most part. In Arnold, we save out, what do we get? OpenEXRs. We bring them into Photoshop. Now, having said that, you can take an EXR and put it in a dome light. It will absolutely read it with no problem. But for the most part, the common format that we can get on the internet for the most part is HDR. Why? Because if you are purchasing an HDR image or somebody's giving it to you for free, they really don't want you messing around with it that much. You're not paying for that privilege, if that makes sense. It's kind of a locked-in format rather than an open where I can go in and play with it. Having said that, you can do it, but you need compositing software to do that with. And that's not cheap either. So. Well, and honestly, I can understand, because if you are a photographer taking pictures and you're going out taking EXR or HDR images for a living, you want to distribute them, you want to be paid for them, but you don't want people messing with them either. Now, having said that, a lot of times, if you actually purchase images like that, they may provide you with either a key or how to alter your HDR images if you buy them. The stuff you get for free, don't even bother, not worth it. In fact, today we're going to send you to a website called HDRI Hub to download a couple of images. We've got a daytime image you're going to download and a nighttime. Get them both. because you never know when you may need to use one for another assignment in school. Honestly, if you collect HDR images, they're usable in any piece of software. Unreal uses them all the time now. All right, so there are two different ways to map them in. And I'm not going to harp on this very long because this honestly can be confusing and there's no reason to use anything other than this. Because I would say 98% of the images you're going to get on the internet are these HDR images. This used to be a standard. It's called a light probe, or a kind of like a mirror ball almost. You know, take a picture in a garden mirror ball. This, believe it or not, is already taken into Photoshop and made spherical. And it's designed for really, really ancient dome lights. In the early days when we were still using sticks and rocks to work with Maya, this is kind of the format that got used. They were much lower resolution. It was called angular because you had a spherical image that you had to put in and it had to be unwrapped in order for it to pop into the dome light properly. Whereas everybody pretty much does this landscape HD format, square, rectangular image, and it gets mapped in spherically. By default, nobody notices anything and you just go on your way. You may run into these, don't get them. Even if they're free, and that's a really hard price to ignore. Now, if you do get them, believe it or not, Arnold can handle this, but you have to kind of dig under the attributes to actually find how to change it. And I'm not even going to show you. You can find that out if you want to in the Arnold help docs. They'll tell you exactly how to change it if you want to. But walk the other way if you see this coming down the street. I don't care how free it is. All right, so as I mentioned before a couple of times, just make sure color management is enabled so we get linear color space and we get everything functioning the way that it should. Like I said, this was not turned on by default prior to Maya 2016. All right, so we have a couple of resources besides Jeremy Burns' stuff. Honestly, if you guys don't read anything out of Jeremy Burns' book at all, read The Art and Science of Color, because that is probably the best chapter in that entire book. He goes through a lot of color theory. In fact, he has his master's based on color theory and use in CG. So we have a couple of charts and guides in here. LED bulb color, how to choose the best LED bulb. It'll basically give you LED bulb equivalents with the Kelvin color scale. Also, there is kind of a preview for Monday. There's the standard surface Arnold user's guide. This basically will take you and give you all the attributes in Arnold, and you can see what each one does. They show you every single attribute with renders, what they do. It's a good way to get familiar with how material works. We're going to get to that on Monday. All right, so for today, before we break, your job is to pick out one day scene. Whether you choose interior or exterior is totally up to you. Whichever environment you choose to do, you want to select the appropriate Word doc underneath of it. This will take you to our OneDrive. So for example, if you choose the interior, select that. That will basically give you the instructions along with, here are what your renders should look like while you're working on it. And these same reference images we give you in your folder so you can bring them into Arnold while you're working. So here is the link inside. And for whatever reason, I don't know why this did not take, just copy the link. That button doesn't work. Just copy the link, paste it into your browser, and it will take you, no, I don't want to subscribe. It'll take you to the right page and free commercial. There is your favorite 2 words, free commercial. And just download it. Now, in this download, you will get a bunch of stuff. So you got URLs, they are all garbage. README, read it, make sure you understand the licensing agreement, even though it's free, you know, you want to make sure that you are following all the guidelines. Inside the main folder, you'll see a bunch of JPEGs and a couple of HDRs and one IBL. That IBL is totally useless. I don't know where it's from. Might be from 3D Studio Max, or I'm not really sure, but nobody uses that anymore. Get rid of all the JPEGs. Don't even look at them. Don't look directly at them. They are so low resolution, they will look terrible if you use them in a dome light. There's not enough resolution to use. Now, you're left with 2 HDRs. How do you know which one to use? Well, honestly, we've got the names for it in here, which one you'll use. But if you take a look at them, there's one of them, and here's the other one. Which one looks good in a light? This one. This is a thumbnail, and it's blurred out. It looks like something you would bring into Substance just to get an idea of, oh, what does my material look like? Oh, look, it's shiny. I can see it, you know, I can see the environment. And even if you don't open them up, take a look at the image size. So down here, this little one is 512 by 256 pixels. The big one is 5K. It's 5,120 by 2560. So get rid of the blurry little one. And this is the one you want to keep. If you're doing the interior day, that is your dome light to use in that environment. Now, if you choose to do the exterior day, if you download the file that we provide for you, we actually have an HDR image of the Zen Garden for you, because we actually have an HDR camera at Full Sail, and we're able to use it to take that picture. So not only is the environment here on campus, but also the image that we took is here on campus too. So for the exterior scene, you don't have to worry about going somewhere to find the dome light image. The HDR images we provide. Now, whichever environment you choose to do for the day, what are you going to do for the night? The opposite, right? It's got to be the opposite time of day, opposite environment. So if you choose to do the exterior day, you do the interior night. If you do the interior day, you do the exterior night. Now, whichever one you choose to use, you go in, use the correct Word doc, and you can download this PDF to use on your computer. You don't necessarily have to just keep it online. Now, this will take you to HDRI Hub, but to a different image. This will take you here. You download this kind of urban night scene, which is pretty cool looking. And when you download it, you will basically get sort of the same thing. You get a bunch of URLs. You get a bunch of stuff. Anything that says backplates, those are all small little images that are JPEGs. JPEGs, no, 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 no IBL either. So you have the same deal. This company always gives you almost like an HDR thumbnail that's blurred. You want the 4K version. So get rid of that little blurry version and you're good to go. If you do the exterior night, you're going to use the dome light image we provide because it's the Zen Garden. And honestly, it's the same image, but since it's high dynamic, you can turn down the intensity and it will become nighttime. All right, now, once you get done doing one day environment, one night environment, you're gonna have a chance to kind of make your own little environment up. Kind of a my comp for Project 5. Now for this, you guys have the same parameters that you had for the other two assignments. You have to use our geometry. You can scale, you can rotate, duplicate, whatever you want. You just can't model anything or bring anything in from the outside. You can use as many lights as you need. No limit on lights. You must use a dome light image. Whether you use our Zen Garden or the two that you downloaded for free or something else you found on the internet, doesn't matter. But you must use a dome light, even if it's not visible in your scene. You're going to do the same thing. Create a camera, look at your reference, frame your shot up, stage your environment like your reference, match the light quality of it. You're going after the overall look and feel. And just like I did with some of the others, let me kind of give you an idea of what some classes in the past have done. Where are we? There we go. All right, so some of these are older environments. Just kept them in there. Not everyone has to be a winner, but we're after the look and feel. Very simple. Parallel shadows, parallel light rays. What kind of light is that? Yeah, directional light. Could be simple. Hey, it works. Not the greatest, but simple. This might be good for a mesh light. You can use mesh lights. You're not confined to, oh, Maybe it's got to be a point light and made visible. Well, no, it could be a mesh light. So, like I said, you can be as simple as you want or as complicated as you want. Nice thing about your comp is you're only doing one render. You're not going to do a long shot and a close up like you are for us in your environment. Questions so far? All right. If there are no questions, it's a good time to take a break.